Hey friends, it's Kara. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our Bookish Flights holiday party that's happening on December 16th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be wrapping up the year with our December pick, The Music Shop by Rachel Joyce. It's a beautiful story about music, connection, and the courage to open your heart. This month, it's going to be just us and no author guest, so grab a festive drink, bring a book that has captivated you in 2025, and join us for a cozy conversation with laughter and a fun bookish giveaway. RSVP at the link in the show notes or head on over to bookishflights.com/read/fall 2025. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Kay Smith-Blum. Kay is a former fashionista and Seattle School Board president. She spends her days debunking the tropes of the mid-20th century history. An odd dream and the recent upheaval over leaking radioactive waste tanks at the Hanford Nuclear site compelled her to write Tangles. Tangles was recently named the Best Regional Fiction in the West for 2025 by the National Indie Excellence Awards and Best Historical Mystery Suspense by the American Fiction Awards at the BookFest 2025. Tangles was also named Book of the Year by the Literary Global Book Awards and Best Debut Fiction by the American Writing Awards. Smith-Blum is a sunrise writer and has lived in Seattle for 4 decades. She works out her writer's block in her son's gardens, which she designed, and the nearest lap pool. Welcome to the show, Kay.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. Well, this is a very in-depth review. I love all the awards that Tangles has won.
Thank you.
Love
so do
this.
I'm like blown away.
But I also feel like we are so much more than our bios. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
So I would say that I am a multitasker at heart, and I've always lived my life that way with lots of different projects going on, no matter what my main focus might be. When I glob onto something like fashion, I love it. I'm like a lifelong lover of the things that I really become embroiled in. And for instance, I was a Seattle School Board president, and I still coach Seattle School Board candidates and Seattle school Board directors. And so even though my service to Seattle Public Schools technically ended in 2013, I'm still embroiled, a decade later, I'm still embroiled in how we're educating kids in our public systems. So that's who I am. Someone who kind of sticks with a thread.
Yeah, I love that because I feel like I have had in like the different decades of my life, like I kind of, like you said, glob onto something and then time takes me elsewhere and then I kind of, lose sight of that thread a little bit and I don't always go back to it. So I like that you do. You follow through with that. Well, for listeners that maybe haven't picked up Tangles yet, let's tell them about it.
So Tangles is technically a Cold War love story, but it's wrapped inside an environmental thriller that is set in a little known but critically important place and time in our U.S. history, the Hanford Nuclear Reserve. The Hanford Nuclear Reserve is 320,000 acres in eastern Washington, and it is the nuclear plant that produced all of the plutonium for every bomb in the U.S. arsenal, including the one that we dropped on Hiroshima. And it's so interesting to me as I travel around with the book, how many folks are not aware that Hanford was not only the critical piece of the Manhattan Project besides Los Alamos, but they don't even realize that existed, right?
Yeah, and I'm amazed it produced every bit of plutonium. Like I had no idea.
Yes. Oak Ridge, Tennessee was the other plutonium plant, but they ended up working more on certain processes around the plutonium. And so when push came to shove at the end of the war, all of the plutonium production for the bombs was moved to Hanford.
Wow.
And 56 million gallons of nuclear waste later, that is still on the reservation in Eastern Washington. Hanford is the largest environmental disaster in the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
It represents 3 Superfund sites.
Wow. And yeah. I had never heard of it until I read your book.
So like you said, read it. You know, what I'm so pleased about within the book is that I believe it delivers a huge amount of information, but in a way that hopefully is not teachy. It's just, it just allows you to understand how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was so impressed by your knowledge. Like I'm reading this and I'm like, does she have a knowledge of chemistry? Like in the background? Like how much research did she put into this book? Because there was, like you said, the hard information is in there, but it was told within a fictional story. So it didn't bog down that thread of the fictional piece either. That kind of was the page, and there was still the page turning aspect of wanting to know what was going to happen to this community.
Yay. That was my hope. So I'm so glad that it resonated that way with you. I had a very different process for this book than my first 2 manuscripts.
Okay.
And I spent 8.5 months basically doing nothing but research. And of course, during research, you're reading some peer-reviewed scientific paper, and the scientists actually make their own statements within those peer-reviewed papers about this or that, and you do find yourself thinking, oh, that could be a good line of dialogue, those kinds of things. And with this book, I listened to dozens upon dozens of oral testimonies from folks that were the library at the Atomic Heritage Foundation in DC, as well as the Hanford History Project, which is located here at Washington State University in Eastern Washington, has hundreds of oral histories recorded by folks who worked at Hanford, both during World War II, the Cold War, but beyond, because it was a producing facility until 1980, which most people don't realize. Wow. And listening to those voices helped me create characters. And again, I'd be listening to an oral history and I hit stop and I'd write down notes about, oh, that could be a good character for this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah.
So Mary, my main female protagonist in the book, really was an amalgamation of voices of women who worked at Hanford.
Yeah. I couldn't help thinking though either is this, to me, one of the saddest parts is like, I could totally see our government doing this, like, and still today, right? Like what else are they covering up?
So much.
I know. I was like,
very much.
This
right
is like
now,
just a sad
so very
depiction.
Much.
Yeah, I was like, this is a sad depiction
of. Well, yes and no. I mean, there was a mentality during wartime, during World War II, when Hanford was built, because Hanford was built literally within 18 months. It was for this facility, one of the largest public construction contracts ever. Right.
Wow. Okay.
And they built 2 nuclear reactors between 1943 and 1944, and this was sort of learning as you go. They weren't exactly sure how to do this atomic bomb thing, and so it was an extraordinary effort, and one that, thank goodness, we were successful in, because otherwise it could be a very different scenario world history wise. If the Germans had gotten the bomb first, we could be living in a very different world. And this was a project that was viewed not just as top secret, but one that was critical to the war effort, which is what they told workers without telling them exactly what they were doing. Yeah. And then, of course, you could be fined or you could be summarily fired if you talked about your work on any level outside of the work and the people that had a need to know about your specific role within the overall task. So there was a huge amount of pride when we did win the war, and that level of pride and thinking still exists very much in the Tri-Cities today. And I think a lot of people, even when they started to become aware of the risks that they might be taking being so close to so much radioactive material, they also had a brother, a father, a cousin that were standing on the front lines, you know, in the Philippines and Germany. And so I think there was an attitude of they're risking their lives, you know, to
keep my part
us safe. And this is my risk that I'm taking to contribute to that effort. So it was an understandable mentality, particularly during World War II. The unfortunate part is we rolled right into the Cold War. And so that layer of secrecy, that oppressive, you know, culture of silence continued for decades. And that's where I think a lot of folks start to have what you just expressed. And that is a deep concern about what is the government's role and what should be public knowledge. How do we navigate between the two to keep our country strong and safe? It's a real juggle, I think.
Yeah. And I think we can all understand that, right? As like, yeah, we don't want other foreign nations knowing our secrets, right? So there is some level of like, I know it's like for our safety, but you said it is such a fine line.
It is a fine line.
What is how much and not enough. Did you find with your research I mean, obviously a lot of this was classified documents and confidential. Like, how was the researching? Is this still closed documents today?
You know, there are still documents that they haven't released around the Manhattan Project in general.
Yeah.
And there is still a culture of secrecy with the Department of Energy, which was originally the Atomic Energy Commission.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, the classified documents have been released in large part about the building of Hanford, about what was created there, about, in many ways, how it was created. Okay. Hanford went from the initial reactor that created the plutonium for the bombs that were dropped on Japan to 9 reactors on the reservation. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. 11 reactors on the reservation over a span of two decades. But it was a real struggle to get any of those documents released 4 decades after World War II ended.
Yeah.
And when they were released, Karen Dorn Steele, who is an incredible investigative journalist who worked for the Spokesman Review, which was the main newspaper out of Spokane, which is downwind from Hanford, and a lot of people in Spokane have suffered the consequences. She's the one who, through the Freedom of Information Act, got a myriad of documents about Hanford and broke so many exclusive stories about what had happened there, how many incidents, how many intended releases, how many accidental. They release radioactivity in droves into the Columbia River just through the effluent, because they use the river water to cool the control rods. And once the rods were cool, they drain the effluent directly into the riverbed. And they did that for decades and no one knew.
I'm even thinking of the people doing this. Like, what type of cognitive dissonance do you have to be like, yeah, let's just dump it right in there and not tell a soul?
I think there was a constant narrative around what the safe level was. And there are scientists today that will tell you, a little radioactivity is good for you. Their opinions, right? But what they did do, and I'm sure you remember in chapter 2, there's a scene where the milkman comes by, but he's not really a milkman. He's picking up urine samples from Hanford workers after long holiday weekends. And they did that because then the worker had been home and urinated all weekend long. So when they did finally pick up a sample, there was less radioactivity in it than there would have been at the beginning, right? On Friday afternoon after being, exposed to whatever levels individual workers were exposed to. But the inference was, we're monitoring you, and that monitoring is keeping you safe. the problem is that quite often during that span of time, particularly during the Cold War years until about 1961, 62, when they saw that radioactivity levels were rising in some of their human monitoring, they simply raised the safe level.
Yeah.
And when I started understanding that in my research, I just sat back gobsmacked that's
I have the chills even thinking about it again.
Yeah. So again, I think there was a lot of wartime expediency in the early years. And I think during the Cold War, that secrecy and the need to be ahead of the game, and to sort of keep up with the Joneses. And it became very clear to the Air Force after their monitoring of Russia that Russia was processing plutonium in much shorter time periods, which makes it even more dangerous to the public at large, because when they do have the releases that they invariably have out of the stacks or dispose of the nuclear waste that's more or less in solid form, or, like I said, piping the effluent into the Columbia, it's much higher levels of radioactivity if you've taken a shorter period of time to process the plutonium. And the US went through multiple cycles of shortening the processing time, lengthening it again, shortening it again. And consequently, those spikes in radioactivity going into the atmosphere of the river or the ground, which eventually went into aquifers and other groundwater sources. It was like highs and lows, but in a way, in my research, I tagged certain things like a spike in childhood leukemia in the early 50s. That's exactly the time period that they were testing shorter processing times. And then when they did what they called redox reflux, and that was in the late 50s, early 60s, that was another time period where there was a spike in certain illnesses, et cetera. And the iodine-49 pathway, which was through, as the radioactive fallout came out of the stacks, it flowed with the wind, wherever the wind went, right?
Yeah.
But it also landed a lot of radioactivity over agricultural fields, as well as pastures. And then the cows eat the pasture land, sagebrush, grass, whatever, it's radioactive. And then when they process milk out of their bodies, that contained iodine-49, which is a radioactive element, which is directly linked to thyroid cancer. And then
it just infiltrated everything.
Exactly.
Everything.
Yeah. And then, at the same time, realize that in the 60s, pesticides were the kind of cause du jour, right?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of folks that I interviewed that said, okay, everybody in this family or that family has cancer of some kind, but could have been pesticides, could have been radioactivity. There were a lot.
Sure.
There were a lot of options.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. A lot of things were pumped into our, soil and our crops and everything around it.
Yep. And so iodine-49, like I said, during this class action suit, which was only in the year 2000, right? Which is not that long ago, right? That was the one pathway that they could say, yes, this is a radioactive element that could only have come from plutonium processing. So yes, we are linking this to Hanford. But my opening incident in the book for Luke, my scientist who was the young boy when Mary, the secretary, was finding out her, information in the early 50s, he grows up, becomes a scientist, and the opening incident is based on a true peer-reviewed paper. Like they actually did harpoon a whale off the coast of Oregon in September of 1963. And when they opened up the whale, they realized he was full of radioactive elements that could only have been produced from nuclear reactors.
Yeah. And you would think, okay, that was 1963 and it still operated till 1980, right? I mean, just like that wasn't enough to be like, what, let's take a step back. But as you said, there was things around the world going on too. So with the Cold War and the war effort and all of that. So what a slippery slope it became.
Yes.
Wow. Well, what is your wish for readers when they pick up Tangles? What do you hope they'll take away?
My hope is that they'll have this desire to know more. And my joy is that I've had so many readers say, I couldn't believe this. And I started Googling and I realized, oh my gosh, every single thing is true. Because unfortunately, the narrative that's out there right now about nuclear energy could not be more deceiving. Nuclear energy, just like a nuclear reactor that created plutonium, they still are splitting an atom. And anytime you do that, there is nuclear waste. You can't get away from it. And unlike chemical waste, where there are options and solutions to actually clean that up, nuclear waste is something that isn't easily just shoveled, into a hole.
Yeah.
And these are elements that have a half-life of thousands of years.
Wow.
And the current, thinking is we're going to encase it in glass or a process called vitrification, but it's not working because you have to liquefy the nuclear waste to a level that will allow the waste to be encased in glass. And right now, they've got, as I said earlier, 56 million gallons of nuclear waste sitting on the Hanford Nuclear Reserve, and it's in concrete tanks and it's eating through the tanks.
Yeah.
Not to mention the elements that are inside the tanks is slightly different in each tank, but many of the elements react within the tank and create byproducts, one of which is hydrogen.
Okay.
And as you know, if hydrogen isn't released, it can blow up.
Yeah.
And there are 60 some odd tanks with all kinds of things in them sitting in Eastern Washington near a population of the Tri-Cities that's well over 200,000 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a critical situation. They've really got to figure it out. But creating more reactors, no matter what their size is only going to add to the problem. And there are nuclear waste dumps across the United States because of the amount of weapons and ammunition that included nuclear elements. So it's not just we've got a problem in Oak Ridge, Tennessee and Eastern Washington.
Yeah.
It really is, nationwide, and every single nuclear plant that's had an accident like 3 Mile Island,
Yeah.
there are huge nuclear waste areas that still haven't been dealt with. So to create more just seems like a bad idea, particularly when nuclear energy is more expensive than some of our other energy alternatives. So my hope is people will want to know more about this and understand that perhaps nuclear energy is not the way to go.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it really is something like, even as you're talking with the nuclear waste and that, I mean, you can't obviously deal with all of that in your book, and right. And that's not something I even was thinking about within the book. So now I'm like, okay, I got to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further.
Which is what my book trailer is. It's the rabbit hole.
Perfect. So, well, what did you learn about yourself through writing this book?
I think what I learned about me is that I'm persistent. That one thing led to the next, and that persistence is really a virtue.
Yeah.
And I also learned, not only just with this book, but with my first two manuscripts, that critiques, no matter how negative they are a gift if you're strong enough to take in what the lesson is. And I think that's a metaphor for what's happening in our world today. I think there are so many issues and innovations to consider and analyze. And if we really dive deep into the issues that confront us, in my case, maybe it was a negative review, then it allows you to grow in that aspect. And my theory, after a while of going through a myriad of queries with agents, with beta reads, with hundreds of such generous people who would take time to read my words, is that everything that someone has to say with regard to my writing is valuable, and it can help me make it better.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I learned about myself, is that I was a lot less defensive than I thought I was.
And I think that's great because exactly to your point, I think we need to be able to hear whether it is positive or negative in every aspect of our life. I think, not to digress it too far, but I think about that with my children. Like, how do I teach them to be able to, you can agree to disagree, or you can listen to someone even though you might not have the same opinion, right? Like, you can still listen to one another and you can still take in that information,
Right.
and again, or like you say, in a positive or negative situation. Like, my kids are young, so it's like these are things I'm thinking about, is how do I teach them to be able to do that, to be receptive?
Mhm. Exactly. And I think that as a writer, you have to be receptive to other people's responses to your work,
Yeah.
or you'll never get better. And I think that there are just so many writers out there that haven't learned those lessons yet. And as they grow in their writing and their thought processes, they'll find that their writing becomes richer
Yeah.
with considering others' opinions.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, I mean, in the instance of your beta readers or your critiques, like, they're reading it to help you at the end of the day.
Yes.
Like, even if it comes in as a negative, they're reading it to help you to do that. So just being receptive to that piece.
Yes.
Well, was there a book that you have read that made you want to become a writer?
Um, I kind of grew up on some of the very first historical fiction that kind of bordered on suspense or thriller. Leon Uris.
Yeah.
I was just, I was so enwrapped in his work when I first read it. I actually went back when I decided to craft a historical fiction manuscripts, and this is now, back in 2015, and I still had some of his books on my bookshelf, and I pulled them off and started reading them again.
Yeah.
And so I think he was powerful, but so were kind of all the classics that I was required, to read in school, and many school children still are. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird,
Yeah.
rocked my world, and because I grew up in Texas, and even though
Okay.
I lived in South Austin, that was completely integrated. It was
Sure.
a third Hispanic, a third Black, a third white. There was still segregation, and that, anybody who says it doesn't exist in the South, well, they're just not paying attention.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of stories really changed me. On a contemporary basis, when I started writing, probably the most powerful one was Tana French, Witch Elm.
Yes. I
She's
haven't read that one of hers, but her writing is so unique.
It really is. And it really taught me that a thriller mystery can be a deep dive into character. And the
Yeah.
way she develops her characters, to me, is just spectacular. I read everything she's written.
Yeah. She's a
But Witch,
fantastic
but
author.
Witch Elm really changed my world.
Okay. Well, you have given us a great segue into reading here. So, how, in your busyness between writing and everything, I know writers also do a lot of help with others, right? You're reading others' works, you're
Right.
editing, you're
Yeah.
critiquing, all of that. How do you find time to read in your busyness?
I have a routine where I do my work, my writing early in the
Okay.
morning, and then I do marketing for the book, after that, kind of late morning. And if I have a podcast scheduled, or I have an interview scheduled, or I have a Zoom with like my co-editors for 5 CDs, I do all of that sort of midday.
Okay.
And then I usually mid to late afternoon have a lap swim, or am working in the kids' gardens or whatever. And usually by 5 or so, I'm back home, and I'll grab a cocktail and sit down with a good book. And I probably don't vary from that unless we have, plans with friends
Sure.
for dinner or something like that. But I would say that easily 4 out of 7 days a week, I'll read for an hour or two before we have dinner.
Yeah.
And that really allows me a good amount of time. And then, traveling is always great. You can listen to an audiobook, or you can, read on a plane, which I'm about to jump on a plane to Boston for my niece's
Yay.
wedding.
That'll
Yay.
get you a good chunk of reading right
That'll
there.
give me a good chunk of time reading. So I'm looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Well, you have been so gracious to bring 3 books with you today in the form of a book flight. Can you tell us how you chose these books?
Well, these are all favorites, and I've read them all over the span of maybe the last 5 years.
Okay.
And I would say that it was hard actually for me to decide which ones that were dual narratives, because I'm a big dual narrative fan. And so many of my favorite writers write in multiple voices. One of the ones I didn't bring was Amar Tolls, The Lincoln Highway. That's one of my favorite books. And I think there were 9 different POVs in that book.
Wow. I haven't read that one
wonderful.
Yet. I've read The Gentleman in Moscow, but not that one.
Yeah, Gentleman in Moscow is great too. But The Lincoln Highway is a wonderful set of voices. So it was hard to choose. But anyway, I narrowed it down. You said 3, so I chose 3.
Yeah. I've been a guest on my show way back on episode 13. I, for fun, had my husband interview me. And so I feel you, because I was so easily came up with 2 books to kind of get the theme of my book flight. And I'm like, well, there's like 7 books I could put in for the 3rd book, but picking that 3rd one was really hard.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's the first book you brought today?
So I'm a huge Jodi Picoult fan, and I've read her, since I think her very first book. I think I've read everything in her library. And it's Keeping Faith, which oddly, I realized I kind of didn't read in order. I realized maybe 2 years ago that I hadn't read that one. And so I downloaded it on my Kindle and put it in my TBR list. And I just literally read it maybe 3 months ago.
Okay.
It's the narrative shifts between a 3rd-person perspective, which I think is an interesting vehicle for dual narratives, and a 1st person. Faith is the daughter in the book, and her mom, Mariah, is trying to understand what's going on with her daughter. And so that's kind of the setup for the story. And it allows us to feel, Mariah's inner thoughts, feelings, and struggles. But she also has a close relationship with her mother. And so the mother is another, Mariah's mother is another character with a perspective. And I think what was fascinating to me about this multi-narrative was the female voices. And, I think that as a gender, so often women are sort of lumped in, she's a woman. But I think what was striking to me is the way Picoult showed us how different women can be, and how different women can experience the same set of events, the same set of circumstances around people that they love and adore, and respond in very different ways. And that was fascinating to me in this narrative. I would highly recommend it. I mean, it has everything in it, from a crumbling marriage to a child who is responding to that divorce scenario, to a mother who, you'll learn this as your kids grow up and get married, who's trying not to be too much of an interferer, but also feels really strongly about what she thinks should happen next.
Yeah.
And so there's so many relatable struggles in this book. I think it's just a terrific read.
She is what I feel like a master too of like digging into topics that happen that people don't really want to touch sometimes. Like exactly. I feel like she does that very well.
She does. And she's fearless. I just think she's a marvelous author.
Yeah. Well, I haven't read this one either, so I'll definitely be adding that to my list. And I love, like you said, the first versus third person narrative. You got me thinking, I'm like, I don't know that I've read one like that. So I'm very intrigued. Yeah.
I think it's a good craft technique, especially when you're trying to differentiate voices.
Yeah. Okay. So that was Keeping Faith by Jodi Picoult. What's the next one you brought today?
The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And this has been read by thousands of people, right? So but and it's not really a dual narrative in the man-woman sense, but I think because it utilizes multiple perspectives and different timelines, it really is a captivating story. I mean, the aging, reclusive Hollywood movie icon, think, Greta Garbo, whoever, right?
Yeah.
Kind of holed up in her apartment, and then the young, aspiring, magazine reporter, Monique, who I think probably has her doubts about who this woman is and what her real motivations are in life, is another incredibly relatable character. And plus, Monique, her husband's left her, her professional life is kind of going down the tubes. And she's really, I think, a bit perplexed about why Evelyn Hugo, this gigundo star, would select her to help her write her biography. But she's really determined. Monique is really determined. And again, I think so many aspects of her character, Monique, will keep multiple generations wanting to follow through and see if Monique is successful in this. But as Evelyn, sort of unspools her story during their sessions together, I think as a reader and through Monique's kind of own tragedies in her life, we start to understand how everybody's story is actually everybody else's story too, a little bit, right? Yeah. It's a terrific tale, and I love the way Taylor Jenkins Reid has woven this one. I haven't read everything of Taylor Jenkins Reid, but this was one of my favorite reads. Yeah. And I had kind of forgotten that it was Taylor Jenkins Reid who wrote it.
Yeah, I really loved, I haven't read all of her work either, but this one I definitely loved. And like you said, I think you could relate so much to Monique, right? And then I wanted to see what was going to happen. Like, I wanted to hear Evelyn's story. Like, what made you become this reclusive? There was just so many pieces that kept me turning the pages of this one.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things about Evelyn's story was how very early on, and I think this isn't a spoiler, I think this is revealed maybe in one of the first or second chapters in Evelyn's Voices, how she meets the boy at the dime store, and she wants candy, but she's really poor as a young girl. And then she realizes she can kind of trade, sex favors, not sex, but like, she can let him see her breast, or she can do this or that and get candy.
Bend her way a little bit. Yeah.
And get candy. Right. And so to me, that was really revealing about everything else about her character later in life, because she learned that lesson early on about how women are really viewed as objects. Yeah. And then she very quickly understood how she could use that to her advantage. Yeah. And I think that says so much about, who she becomes later in life and why she was successful as a movie star. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And what's the last book you brought today?
Horse by Geraldine Brooks. And this is true historical fiction, but again, a dual narrative with a contemporary story woven into the powerful, evocative story of the beginnings of horse racing in the United States. And what a racist industry it was and is still in many ways today. I just think Brooks, who, as you know, is a Pulitzer Prize winner, is one of the best writers we have in the world today. But her research is impeccable. And most of her stories are based on true events, as mine was, Tangles. Yeah. And so I just learned a tremendous amount reading her story. And her book, Horse, was one that I went back and read parts of as I was developing Tangles' plot, because I think she does such a good job of how she weaves the two different time periods together, because you have Theo, who is an art historian who stumbles upon, this horse skeleton, and then also the story of this contemporary art collector in the 50s who was obsessed with this painting of this horse, right? And it was the only traditional painting that that art collector, Martha Jackson, had. Everything else in her collection was modern, right? And so Theo and also Jess, who's a Smithsonian scientist from Australia, they both are coming at the story from two different angles: the painting versus the horse skeleton, right? Yeah. And then what Brooks does so masterfully is she takes you into the beginnings, where Thomas, another painter who created the horse painting. He's like an itinerant painter during, the Civil War time period. And in 1850, he ends up painting this painting of Lexington, this famous stallion.
Yeah.
And who was Lexington's trainer but a young boy, Jarrett, who was a slave.
Okay.
And was, his care and breeding of this horse was just such a tour de force tale of the racist horse racing industry.
Wow.
And the industry itself was entirely reliant upon the talents of African-American horse trainers. All of those stories, all of those incredible horses would not have been the same if it hadn't been for these folks who were rarely given credit for their talent. So it's an extraordinary story, and one with multiple voices. All of those people have, or most of those people have a voice, Theo being a main one in the 2019, and then both Thomas and Jarrett being voices in the 1850s and onward. Yeah.
Oh, see, I haven't even read the blurb on this one. Like, it has been, I've heard of it and I have not read it yet, but I'm like, you have me so intrigued. I have to go. I'm going to add it to my library holds right now.
Yeah, there's a wonderful interview. I think it was at the National Book Awards a couple of years ago. Geraldine Brooks was interviewed, and she talked about the time that she spent at the Smithsonian and the various places that the Smithsonian owns, because they also have warehouses that are outside of the main facilities, right?
Okay.
And what a wonderful treasure trove those are.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll have to check this out. We have spent some time in Lexington because my sister-in-law is actually an equine vet. And so she was an equine vet in Lexington for, I think it was about 5 years. She doesn't live there anymore, but I learned so much. I mean, like, just that is an industry that, it was eye-opening. Mm-hmm. And obviously I didn't know the racist piece of that and the workers, but all of that, but like just her being a caregiver for the horse on the back end,
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting industry.
Yes.
So, okay. So that was Horse by Geraldine Brooks. Thank you so much for bringing those books with you today. How I love to end our show is with our bonus pairings. They're a speed round of questions you can answer really quick. Are you a rereader?
I am an e-reader, and I'm also a rereader.
Okay. So love it.
I keep things on my Kindle, and I also go back and reread things all the time.
Yeah. Love it. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Well, I think I already gave that up. Tom French's Witch Elm. That changed my life most recently.
Okay.
But there are so many books that I read as a high schooler that really, really kept me going in many ways when I was dealing with difficult things in life. Yeah.
I love that. Where is your favorite place to read?
Well, in Seattle, we have a wonderful living room that overlooks Elliott Bay. We're so fortunate. And so I'll prop myself up with pillows behind my back on the Chase Lounge and dive in.
That sounds lovely. Lastly, what are you reading next?
So next up for me is David Sedaris's Happy Go Lucky. I love his work, and I just feel like I needed some lighter reads.
He's a good one.
It's been on my TBR for almost 3 years, so
Yeah, he's a great one to kind of cleanse the palate a little bit.
Yeah, and I also have Taylor Jenkins Reid Atmosphere on my TBR next after David, because it appears to be the read of the summer, and summer's almost over, so I better get with it.
I know. I've been hearing that one everywhere. So, but thank you so much for coming on the show with me today, Kay. I know your time is precious, and I appreciate all you've given me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation. I loved it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Kay Smith-Blum, including her book flight of dual narrative novels. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time. Hey listeners, it's Kara, your host. After 176 amazing episodes and hundreds of book recommendations, I wanted to make it a little bit easier for you to find your next great read. The Bookish Flights Roadmap is your guide to all 175 podcast episodes, sorted by genre so you can quickly find the stories that fit your reading mood. From picture books to adult novels and everything in between, it's the perfect way to explore past episodes and discover new favorites. You can find your copy of the Bookish Flights Roadmap at www.bookishflights.com/read/roadmap, or just click the link in the show notes.